is Bean to Barstool, a podcast that looks at the intersections of craft beer and craft chocolate. My name is David Nilsson. I'm a professional beer writer and an advanced cicerone, and the creator and host of this show. The music for this episode is by my dear friend, indie folk musician Anna P.S. You can find out more about Anna's music in the show notes or at her website, annapsmusic.com. You can find links and information about our guests in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy this episode of Bean to Barstool. I recently wrote an article for the excellent Full Pour magazine about chocolate made with barrel-aged cacao and featured previous guests Violet Sky Chocolate out of Indiana and Ritual Chocolate out of Utah. I had planned to include Monsoon Chocolate from Arizona, but unfortunately we weren't able to make our schedules work to complete the interview before my deadline. Thankfully, Monsoon founder Adam Krantz and I ultimately found time to talk for this episode instead. Monsoon is making bean-to-bar chocolate in the desert climate of Tucson, Arizona. It's not a region we might think of as a hotspot for craft chocolate, but as Adam explains, the Southwest has a strong historical claim to cacao, and he wanted to honor that heritage while also pushing the boundaries of flavor with unique regional ingredients like chiltepin chilies or mesquite.
The Southwestern United States has a deep, deep connection to cacao, and that story is evolving. And for a region that maybe has the most historical context of cacao use in America, it's now a place where the future of cacao and chocolate is being brought into that story.
That's Adam Krantz at Monsoon. In our conversation, he tells us the story of Monsoon and shares his passion for bringing the flavors of the desert Southwest to craft chocolate. Before we jump in, I want to give a shout out to our latest sponsor-level supporter on Patreon, Jorge Torres. Jorge recently upped his support from Zinester to sponsor because he believes in what we're doing at Bean to Barstool and Final Gravity, and we're so grateful to him and our other sponsors. If you don't already, please consider supporting us on Patreon at any level so we can keep publishing zines, this podcast, and other great content. Now, let's listen to our conversation with Adam of Monsoon Chocolate. Adam, thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to talk all about Monsoon Chocolate. Before we get into all the details, why don't you tell me a little bit about the story behind Monsoon, how it got started, how you got started making chocolate?
Sure. Yeah, it's been a long, strange journey. I spent my whole adult life working in the culinary world. I worked in restaurants when I was younger, kind of worked my way up through the ranks. I eventually moved into specialty grocery. Back in 2009, I was a category buyer for our local food co-op. And that really was the first time that I had become aware of single origin chocolate as a concept. And this was a little bit before the modern renaissance of bean to bar making. The brands that I was aware of were in the natural organic channel, brands like Green and Black and Equal Exchange. But part of my responsibility was purchasing those products. And it kind of planted the seed, I think, to recognize that there's more depth in the world of chocolate than I was aware of. A few years later, I was the grocery manager at a place in Tucson called Time Market. And the owners had spent some time in San Francisco, and they had discovered dandelion chocolate right as they were getting started. It was my first experience with, I guess, what we'll call a modern craft chocolate bar. It's a story that a lot of people share, you know, a 70% Madagascar bar, kind of my aha moment, realizing that chocolate could be very complex and that there was terroir associated with it. After I was at Time Market, I was at a place called World Foods in Portland, Oregon. You know, I think I just was at the right place at the right time when this industry was really starting to gain momentum. This is 2013, 2014. I had the opportunity to curate a chocolate program in Portland that was, you know, really big. We had over 1,000 chocolate bars on the shelves. I had the good fortune to interact with a lot of chocolate makers, to become friendly with them. Started off as curiosity. You know, I started making chocolate in my living room. I found a champion juicer at a thrift store. I bought a little Santa wet grinder. And I used to tell people for years that I would never become a chocolate maker, that I really was just having fun, wanting to understand the process more. But, what started off as kind of this exciting project turned into a passion. It really became more of an obsession over time. So then I got the idea that I really wanted to try to do something in the chocolate world. And I have a long history in Tucson, Arizona, and living in Portland at the time. There's a lot of really great chocolate companies in Portland. So I didn't really feel like Portland needed another person in that space. So I started thinking about, where in the world do I want to be if I'm going to pursue this? And I just kept coming back to Tucson because it's where I got my start in the food world. It's kind of the place that I consider home more than any other place. And I just knew that if I didn't do something with chocolate in Tucson, eventually somebody else would. But, I really wanted to be the one to do it. I felt like, there was such an opportunity to bring this chocolate culture, this heritage, to Tucson, and then also Tucson, the Sonoran Desert, being this beautiful landscape with incredible ingredients. It just seemed like, the two worlds were meant to be together.
Well, I definitely want to get into talking about some of those local and regional ingredients in just a bit. Let's talk a little bit about the branding of Monsoon. How did you come up with that name and what does it mean?
Yeah, so there is a monsoon season that happens in Tucson. It's late summer. It is a really beautiful time of year. The summers in Tucson can be oppressively hot. We can have temperatures up over 110 degrees Fahrenheit for weeks on end. So when the monsoon season rolls in, it's it's a break from the heat. It has a really positive connotation in town. When people think of monsoons, we think of relief. And I just love the comparison really of the way a monsoon kind of comes out of nowhere. There's this torrential downpour for 20 minutes, and then everything settles, the clouds, kind of part, sun comes out again. So I find an analogy, I guess, there with the tasting experience of chocolate.
Well, I'm always interested in the choices that craft chocolate makers make when it comes to packaging because there's so many individual choices between colors, designs, even the weight and texture of the material. Talk a little bit about the choices you made there and how those help tell the Monsoon story.
Yeah. One of the goals I think that we had when we set out to create this brand is that we wanted it to really feel like a product of the Southwest, but we just didn't want to be too on the nose about it. We didn't want to, revert to classic Southwestern imagery, with lots of cactuses. And we really wanted it to be more representative of the feeling, of the vibe of the Southwest. As far as packaging materials, I feel like, I really had the benefit of being a retailer for a few years, and I had the opportunity to see the wide gambit of packaging choices and see how customers interact with them. And we kind of make this joke, and I've heard this in the industry that, a consumer buys your bar the first time because it was pretty. They buy it the second time because it was actually good. So we know that there's no amount of words or text that I can put on a package that's going to convince somebody to purchase it. So we try to represent the quality of our products through the quality of our packaging.
Well, let's talk about your most fundamental ingredient, cacao. Tell me a little bit
Yeah.
about your sourcing.
Yeah. So, like a lot of chocolate companies in America, we have intermediaries that we work with to source our cacao. These intermediaries are Uncommon Cacao, Meridian Cacao. We work with Diana Doherty at Cacao Services. Along the last 5, 6 years, we've had a few opportunities to do some direct purchasing. But yeah, those intermediaries have done such remarkable things to grow this business. And we really feel like they're an extension of our own business.
Do you feel like you have an affinity for any particular origins or something you really like working with?
Every bean is kind of unique and standalone. And so I don't like to say that I blindly like an entire cocoa producing country. There's a lot of nuance in there, but we just feel so privileged to get to work with the cacao that we get to work with. I really think that some of these sources are just the best that exist in the world. So I'm personally very, very drawn to Mexican cacao, and that's like a major focus of our company at this point.
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, Final Gravity Issue 5 is now available in the shop on beantobarstool.com. This 5th issue of our zine telling personal, human-centered stories from the world of beer is full of great articles. Bano Segudu tells the story of the South African beer style Umqombothi, poignantly explaining its role in her culture and the importance in her family's celebrations and milestones. Maria Krugliak writes about discovering the Portuguese half pint after moving to Portugal during the COVID-19 pandemic. Amanda Bruns and Obakeng Molope discuss the water spirit Mamuhaswa and the collaboration beer they brewed in her honor. These and numerous other stories fill the 56 pages of this zine. We've expanded it and added a few features for this issue. It's full color, full of lots of beautiful photography and art. Definitely check this out. It's on beantobarstool.com/shop. You can purchase this issue or subscribe, and you can always support us on Patreon and get extra perks as well. Cheers. Is that sort of the regional focus? I mean, that's your closest origin, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most people get into this industry because they care about sustainability, they care about, equity. We see it as the best opportunity to strengthen these goals and these objectives within our own company is to be sourcing from the closest region that we can.
Well, let's talk about some of those regional ingredients that you've alluded to. Share with me some examples of ingredients or culinary flavors that would be familiar to the desert Southwest that you're able to work with.
Absolutely. So we get to work with the chiltepin pepper, which is a arc of taste ingredient. And chiltepin is considered the mother chili pepper, kind of the source of capsaicin. We work with mesquite pod that's harvested from the San Javier Cooperative Farm just outside of Tucson. We get to work with ingredients like blue corn from the Santa Ana Pueblo, which is just outside of Albuquerque. We also get to work with a lot of local producers that are like-minded, working with our natural terroir, our local ingredients. We work with Desert Provisions, who is sourcing salt from the Sea of Cortez. We're working with Hamilton Distillers. They're the producers of the Whiskey Del Bac Dorado, which is a mesquite smoked whiskey.
What is it like developing the recipes and roast profiles and all those different decisions when you're working with ingredients that really there's no blueprint for? If you're going to work with mesquite, how do you begin that process?
Yeah, I think, part of that is growing up in Tucson, spending a lot of time in Tucson. It's a very familiar flavor. So having tasted it throughout my childhood, having a sense of, I guess, a notion of what we want to accomplish, a lot of it is fumbling in the kitchen until you get it right. Some of these products really took quite a lot of R&D because, yeah, there is no roadmap exactly what to do. Mesquite is an incredible ingredient, but there's a threshold, there's a limit to how much you can include before the flavor starts to go a little too intense, a little bit too vegetal, tangy. So it took lots of iterations, and we just slowly triangulate on that flavor that we're seeking.
Well, there's the popular saying in cooking, but in food pairing as well, that what grows together goes together. I think that's sometimes overstated a little bit, but with working with Mexican cacao, do you feel like there is any kind of synergy there with working with local ingredients with that origin?
I certainly do. Yeah. I mean, I think like even if it's just poetic, even if it's just a thing that we think is really beautiful, there's meaning behind that, right? I don't know if I would say on a, from a food science perspective that Mexican cacao pairs better with certain regional ingredients,
Mhm.
but I think it seems to make sense in our minds.
You mentioned blue corn. I'm particularly interested in that. You're working with corn from the Pueblo of Santa Ana. I actually wrote an article recently about a brewery that's working with that exact same corn, Bow and Arrow Brewing in New Mexico. So I was really interested when I saw
Yeah.
you were working with that. Talk a little bit about that relationship and that ingredient.
So it's, the Tamaya people, the Tamayan blue corn, in my opinion, is just the best blue corn that you can source in America right now. They have, hundreds and hundreds of years of expertise growing and processing this corn. And it's been a really, really positive relationship for us. And it's really one of our most favorite products that we make.
And how does that actually get incorporated into the bar?
So we actually refine it into the white chocolate bar in the melanger. We have a very specific goal when we're making that bar, texturally speaking. Our goal is to not over refine it. We don't really want a perfectly smooth, melt on your tongue white chocolate, because in my opinion, a lot of the enjoyment of the blue corn comes from perceiving the texture, which is why we call the chocolate bar a blue corn atole white chocolate, as a reference to atole, the thick kind of beverage that is a little bit gritty and is almost like a porridge.
Share just a little bit more about that beverage for the listeners.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a Mesoamerican beverage, typically involving corn, dairy, some herbs and spices that would be cooked. If you were to add chocolate to it, then we start calling that champorado. But atole is the base beverage, and so oftentimes it would be sweetened with piloncillo or honey. So we really just wanted to take the idea of atole and put it into a solid tablet form.
It's a really visually striking bar too. How did you expect that to come out visually? I mean, did you have any expectation of what the color was going to be like?
The color was actually one of the hangups during the R&D process. It took us a while to figure out how we could create a bar that looked like something you would want to eat. As many listeners probably know, blue corn, once you process it isn't blue. It doesn't tint things blue. It actually turns out more of a gray color. So without the addition of the purple pea flowers, this bar would look like a spackling compound. And so, for a while we were testing the bar and we were really happy with the flavor, but really just couldn't get past the fact that it was a gray chocolate bar. And the purple pea flower was the perfect solution for us to use a natural ingredient to help kind of push the color profile just slightly in the right direction. We don't have to add a whole lot of it. But it just, we eat with our eyes. And so it really helps kind of set the mood for what you're about to experience.
That pea flower, the color is activated by pH, right? So it changes. Is that right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I've had beers with that before that are just this striking purple color. It's so cool. You mentioned the distillery that you're working with earlier with the whiskey. Talk a little bit more about that relationship and the barrel aged bar that you've got.
Yeah, we have been working with Hamilton Distillers slash Whiskey Del Bach pretty much since we opened. Initially we were using their whiskey to make certain confections. We were doing you know, whiskey infused caramels, and we were doing ganaches, and we had always wanted to do a chocolate bar. And I was on the fence about what approach to take. There's a lot of companies out there that work with distillers, local distillers. Some of the makers will soak the nibs in whiskey, then they'll dehydrate the nibs and refine it. There's a lot of different approaches. We decided that we really wanted to barrel age because the Dorado whiskey that they make is so unique. It's like a Scottish style peated whiskey, where they use velvet mesquite for the smoking. I thought, like, I want more than just whiskey flavor. I really wanted the oakiness of the barrel. We wanted it to be more aromatic and less kind of in the throat. So again, trial and error. We've worked out a really amazing partnership with them where we pick up barrels just as they're being drained, so they're super fresh. We take them back to the factory, we cut them open, we have refined chocolate where some people will soak the nibs, they'll age the nibs. We actually manufacture chocolate, then we break up the chocolate. We essentially put it inside of a huge nut milk bag and then put that inside of the barrel, seal it up, and we let it age for 4 months.
Wow.
So, cocoa butter being the carrier of aroma, it's just absorbing all of that aroma. And then after the 4 months, when we remove the chocolate from the barrel, we go through a process of, I want to say, adjusting the texture because it's absorbing, alcohol, it's absorbing moisture while it's in there. So we have to do a little bit of work to kind of remove the moisture, get it to the texture that we want. But in the end, we're left with this bar that really is just a beautiful flavor profile. And it's not over the head with alcohol, but it really, to us, feels like it really captures that flavor.
I assume you've had some of the bars that have been made just by aging the cacao that way. Do you notice a distinct difference from the process?
I do, yeah. I feel like, I know that there are companies that will soak the nibs and then they'll refine chocolate. There are other companies that will barrel age the nibs and then they'll refine. I feel like each one is a good process with a different result. So I feel, for this particular product, we feel like we chose the right approach. But I don't think that one is necessarily better or worse. I think it really comes down to the flavor profile of the whiskey and what you're trying to achieve.
With the cacao butter soaking up aroma like that, have you tried that with different percentages of cocoa butter to see how much intensity that adjusts?
Yeah, we have. We've done a little bit of experimenting. Yeah, it took us a while to kind of nail, because this product is a 74%. It took us a little bit to figure out exactly what percentage was the sweet spot.
So you mentioned that you were the first bean to bar maker in Tucson, and you're making all of these bars that are pretty unusual. I mean, you make some typical craft chocolate styles, but you're also doing some pretty unusual stuff. What was the early response like when suddenly you were releasing these into a market that hadn't had anything before that?
It honestly was overwhelmingly positive. We were really surprised by the response. I've spent a long time in Tucson and I love Tucson, but I wasn't sure if Tucson was ready for a $10 chocolate bar. When we opened the doors, we opened to incredible demand that really we were not able to keep up with for the first maybe 3 or 4 years of running the business. And it seemed like no matter how much we scaled up, the demand was scaling faster. We're fortunate that we've gotten to a place now where we actually feel like we're on top of it. I think a lot of chocolate companies, have to bootstrap the operation as they're getting started. So we've joked that we set sail before we finished building the ship. I had a chocolate maker friend say to me before this whole thing started, "You will never stop buying machinery." And that is accurate.
It's just an
But yeah,
escalating
but yeah,
treadmill of getting the next bigger thing. Yeah.
Yeah, as soon as you resolve a bottleneck in one place, you're looking at the next bottleneck. So, and then as you scale, more bottlenecks emerge. But I will say that overall, I'm just like blown away by Tucson's response and how supported we feel within this community.
What's next for Monsoon? Do you have anything coming up you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, there's always a lot, We are very ambitious. Over the years, we've had to learn how to temper that a little bit, no pun intended. But, about 4 months ago, we opened a new cafe location, and it's just going really well. It's really exciting for us. We're approaching some new opportunities right now. It's looking like you're going to see Monsoon Chocolate more widespread across the country. We're looking at working out a distribution deal. We have a lot of new products that we're going to be releasing over the next 6 months. We found a lot of success in what people are calling beyond the bar categories. And, there are those companies out there that just really focus on single origin chocolate. And we have a lot of single origin chocolate because there's a place for it. There's a demand for it. But I'm really motivated to meet consumers where they're at and provide, new products that fulfill categories that not a lot of bean to bar makers are fulfilling. So we moved into the world of enrobing, organic dried fruits and nuts, panning, more confectionery. We have a whole bunch of malt balls and brittles. And so all of these categories are expanding over the next 6 months. We're expanding our pantry catalog, which has ingredients, like nibs and cocoa powder and some of the raw ingredients that we're sourcing for our own production. We're making them available to our customers as well. So we're going to be moving into drinking chocolates and baking chocolate. There's a lot,
Yeah, you have a lot on your plate there.
It's exciting, really. We just see an opportunity here to be a place in the Southwest for everything chocolate related.
What story is Monsoon Chocolate telling?
I think that Monsoon is telling the story that the Southwestern United States has a deep, deep connection to cacao. And that story is evolving. And for a region that maybe has the most historical context of cacao use in America, it's now a place where the future of cacao and chocolate is being brought into that story.
I love talking with chocolate makers or brewers who are using ingredients and flavors from their region to color outside the lines of tradition, or perhaps more accurately, to erase and redraw those lines. Tradition is not a fixed thing. Norms change. We can expand the guidelines for tomorrow's makers and tasters by thinking creatively today. Thanks to Adam for coming on the show today. You can find the link to Monsoon's online shop in the show notes. Thanks to all of you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bean to Barstool.